We, the people, are victims in a vicious war of counterintelligence being perpetrated against us. The governing bodies of the world have decided they are the lords of our lives, and that our own personal pursuits to happiness are null and void in the wake of their desires.
I was the fastest girl in America. I set many national records, and I was a straight A student. When I was 16, I got a call from Alberto Salazar at Nike. He was the world's most famous track coach, and he told me I was the most talented athlete he'd ever seen. During my freshman year in college, I moved out to train with him and his team full-time at Nike World Headquarters. It was a team of the fastest athletes in the world, and it was a dream come true. I joined Nike because I wanted to be the best female athlete ever. Instead, I was emotionally and physically abused by a system designed by Alberto and endorsed by Nike. This is what happened to me. When I first arrived, an all-male Nike staff became convinced that in order for me to get better, I had to become thinner and thinner and thinner. This Nike team was the top-running program in the country. And yet we had no certified sports psychologist, there was no certified nutritionist. It was really just a bunch of people who were Alberto's friends. So when I went to anybody for help, they would always just tell me the same thing, and that was to listen to Alberto. Alberto was constantly trying to get me to lose weight. He created an arbitrary number of 114 pounds, and he would usually weigh me in front of my teammates and publicly shame me if I wasn't hitting weight. He wanted to give me birth control pills and diuretics to lose weight, the latter of which isn't allowed in track and field. I ran terrible during this time. It reached a point where I was on the starting line and I'd lost the race before I started, because in my head, all I was thinking of was not the time I was trying to hit, but the number on the scale I saw earlier that day. It would be naive to not acknowledge the fact that weight is important in sports. It's like boxers need to maintain a certain weight, or, everybody always ends up citing the math about how the thinner you are, the faster you're going to run because you have to carry less weight. But here's a biology lesson I learned the hard way. When young women are forced to push themselves beyond what they're capable at their given age, they're at risk for developing REDS. Suddenly, you realize you've lost your period for a couple months, and then a couple months becomes a couple years, and in my case, it was a total of 3. And if you're not getting your period, you're not going to be able to have the necessary levels of estrogen to maintain strong bone health. And in my case, I broke 5 different bones. The New York Times Magazine published a story about how Alberto was training me and nurturing my talent. We weren't doing any of that. I felt so scared, I felt so alone, and I felt so trapped. And I started to have suicidal thoughts. I started to cut myself. Some people saw me cutting myself, and nobody really did anything or said anything. So in 2015, I ran this race, and I didn't run super well, and afterwards, there was a thunderstorm going on. Half the track was under one tent. Alberto yelled at me in front of everybody else at the meet, and he told me that I clearly gained 5 pounds before the race. It was also that night that I told Alberto and our sports psych that I was cutting myself, and they pretty much told me they just wanted to go to bed. And I think for me, that was my kick in the head where I was like, this system is sick. I think even for my parents in certain ways, once I finally vocalized to them, they were horrified. They bought me the first plane ride home. and they were like, get on that flight, get the hell out of there. I wasn't even trying to make the Olympics anymore. I was just trying to survive. So I made the painful choice and I quit the team.
After a multi-year investigation, the U.S. anti-doping agency has banned Alberto Salazar from the sport for 4 years.
Nike will shut down the Oregon project.
Nike CEO Mark Parker stepping down from the company in January of 2020.
Those reforms are mostly a direct result of the doping scandal. They're not acknowledging the fact that there's a systemic crisis in women's sports and at Nike, in which young girls' bodies are being ruined by an emotionally and physically abusive system. That's what needs to change, and here's how we can do it. First, Nike needs to change. In track and field, Nike is all-powerful. They control the top coaches, athletes, races, even the governing body. You can't just fire a coach and eliminate a program and pretend the problem is solved. My worry is that Nike's merely going to rebrand the old program and put Alberto's old assistant coaches in charge. Secondly, we need more women in power. Part of me wonders if I had worked with more female psychologists, nutritionists, and even coaches, where I'd be today. I got caught in a system designed by and for men, which destroys the bodies of young girls. Rather than force young girls to fend for themselves, we have to protect them. I genuinely do have hope for the sport, and I plan to be running for many years to come. And so part of the reason I'm doing this now is I want to end this chapter, and I want to start a new one.
This clip is not rated, but is for mature audiences only. What you are about to watch contains explicit language, adult themes, violence, and may not be suitable for viewers under 18. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You can activate parental controls from any device by going to account settings. This is for fair use only. Thank you for watching Hidden Hand.
In the last few months, the name Jeffrey Epstein has fully entered the public consciousness, while speculation on his connections to sex trafficking have long been the subject of myriad articles and videos. The finer details of his past have largely remained a mystery. For those who knew him, this penchant for secrecy is no surprise. There's one thing Epstein did make clear. The entry minimum to his highly exclusive investment firm was $1 billion. Anything short, and you'd be curtly rejected. One senior investment manager told Vanity Fair in 2011 that the trading desks don't seem to know him. It's unusual for animals that big not to leave any footprints in the snow. Another prominent financial executive compared him to the title character of the F. Scott Fitzgerald novel, The Great Gatsby. He's this mysterious Gatsby-esque figure. He likes people to think that he's very rich, and he cultivates this air of aloofness. The whole thing is weird. The mirage surrounding Epstein is carefully maintained. After refusing to give a reporter an interview, Epstein invited him to a game of chess. "Let's play chess," he said. "You be white, you get the first move." The reporter goes on to write that no one really seems to know him, or his history completely, or what his arsenal actually consists of. He has carefully engineered it, so that he remains one of the few truly baffling mysteries among New York's moneyed world. People know snippets, but few know the whole. Long before his rise to the highest levels of elite society, Epstein was a high school physics teacher at the highly esteemed Manhattan school, Dalton. He reportedly pushed the limits of the dress code, wearing gold chains, fur coats, and an open shirt exposing his chest. And several students remember seeing him at high school parties. As one of the highest-ranking schools in the country, Dalton drew kids from prestigious families in media and finance. One father who worked on Wall Street was so impressed by Epstein that he bluntly asked, "What are you doing teaching math at Dalton? You should be working on Wall Street." This is how Epstein was introduced to Wall Street trading legend Ace Greenberg. Greenberg was famously uninterested in hiring people with fancy degrees, and instead, people with, quote, PSD degrees, which stood for poor, smart, and a deep desire to become rich. Under the mentorship of Greenberg and then Bear Stearns CEO James Kane, he excelled, quickly mastering complex pricing models at a time when options trading was a new frontier. After just 5 years, he left to start his own firm. Aside from the billion-dollar entry fee to the firm, he required clients to assign him power of attorney to control all funds, even able to supersede family members. Unlike prominent Wall Street figures such as George Soros, only rumors are known about Epstein's client list. One senior financial executive explains, Jeff maintains some sort of money management firm, though you won't get a straight answer from him. He once told me he had 300 people working for him, and I've also heard that he manages Rockefeller money. But one never knows. It's like looking at the Wizard of Oz. There may be less there than meets the eye. Murray Gell-Mann, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, explained that at his dinner parties, Epstein gave off the impression that his list of clients included the Queen of England. It wasn't uncommon for Epstein to invite physicists to his mansions. Prestigious academics ranging from biologists to mathematicians spoke highly of Epstein, praising his enthusiasm for scientific projects, which was inspired by his unusual aptitude for theoretical physics. This ability to easily socialize with elite scholars aligns with Marshall Rose's description of Epstein. Rose, a real estate developer who worked with him, claims he digests and decodes information very rapidly, which results in much shorter meetings. Not every meeting with Epstein was conventional, though. In one meeting at his Manhattan mansion, he invited a young professor, as well as John Brockman, a world-renowned publisher who represented prominent scientists ranging from Richard Dawkins to Nassim Taleb. Across the table sat an aspiring fashion model and her friend. According to the professor, he would alternate between them. Sometimes he'd turn to his left and ask some sciencey questions. Then he'd turn to his right and ask the model to show him her portfolio. At some point in the meeting, a young female assistant entered the room to massage Epstein's neck. Mr. Epstein never shied away from these sorts of displays. When he invited 21 physicists to his private island in 2006, an entourage of 4 young women trailed him at all times. Roger Schenck, a cognitive psychologist who was invited to Epstein's island for a meeting on artificial intelligence, claims that during the experts' discussions, Epstein sat in the back of the room, hugging and kissing 2 girls on a sofa. Epstein didn't always meet with scientists in his home or island, though. After donating millions to Harvard and opening up an office nearby, he'd simply show up to its cafeteria to join in on lunchroom discussions with professors. Steven Pinker, a psychologist at Harvard University, wasn't impressed, calling him an intellectual imposter. Friends and colleagues described him to me as a quantitative genius and a scientific sophisticate, and they invited me to salons and coffee clatches at which he held court. But I found him to be a kibitzer and a dilettante. He would abruptly change the subject, ADD style, dismiss an observation with an adolescent wisecrack, and weighted his own opinions as much as scholarly literature. In one discussion at Harvard, Epstein criticized initiatives to reduce starvation because of overpopulation concerns. When Steven Pinker pushed back on this, it was made clear that he was no longer welcome at meetings with Epstein and, quote, voted off the island. According to a person familiar with the meetings, Epstein had grown tired of Pinker fact-checking him when he, quote, shot off his mouth on topics he knew nothing about, end quote. Professor Pinker, however, appeared to be an exception in his skepticism of Epstein. Likely attracted by the potential of generous grants, the number of elite scientists who at some point met with Epstein is extensive. The darker undertones in Epstein's interest in science became clearer in the early 2000s. This is when he began revealing his plan to seed the human race with his DNA. Jaron Lanier, a computer scientist and virtual reality pioneer, was invited to a meeting at Epstein's New Mexico ranch. This is where he met a scientist who worked for NASA. She explained that Jeffrey Epstein's vision was to impregnate 20 women at a time in his 33,000 square foot Zorro ranch outside Santa Fe. He got the idea from a radical human breeding experiment that took place in the 1980s, the Repository for Germinal Choice. The Repository for Germinal Choice was a sperm bank founded by millionaire eugenicist Robert Graham. Its goal was to artificially inseminate women with the sperm of geniuses to create superhumans. At least 3 Nobel laureates were confirmed as donors, but 20 years later, it shut down, its founder dead, its records sealed, and the fate of the 200 children it produced unknown. Jaron Lanier recalled seeing attractive women with exceptional academic credentials at Epstein's private dinner parties and was given the impression that they were being screened as potential candidates for his plan. Epstein also pursued other interests like cryogenics, a quasi-science that explores whether people's bodies can be frozen to be brought back to life at some point in the future. One person familiar with this plan was told that Epstein wanted his head and penis to be frozen. Another project he bankrolled aimed to identify an unspecified particle that could trigger the feeling that someone was watching you. These transhumanist interests might simply appear to be the grandiose pet projects of an eccentric billionaire. Perhaps scientists only humored him in the hope of receiving generous donations. But Jeffrey Epstein's friendships to the world's most powerful politicians and celebrities only invites more serious questions.
Welcome to the Southern White House.
Since becoming president, Donald Trump has branded Mar-a-Lago the Southern White House, a place that entertains foreign leaders, where military strikes are ordered, and whose terrace served as an open-air situation room over dessert.
And we had the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake that you've ever seen.
But in the 90s, Mar-a-Lago was Trump's South Florida party palace, one frequented by Jeffrey Epstein, who is facing charges for sex trafficking. He has pleaded not guilty. The president says his relationship with Epstein was no different than anyone else in their elite circle.
Well, I knew him like everybody in Palm Beach knew him. He was a fixture in Palm Beach. I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years. I wasn't a fan.
Yet, a tape in the NBC archives of a Mar-a-Lago party shows Trump giving Epstein his personal attention. Donald! 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 The footage, shot in November of 1992, before Trump opened the resort as a club, shows the future president surrounded by cheerleaders for the Buffalo Bills and Miami Dolphins, capturing Trump's fun-loving bachelor lifestyle for an appearance on Faith Daniels' NBC talk show.
We're going to get great ratings in your show.
Trump is surrounded by women as music blares in the background. After a while, Trump goes to greet 3 new guests, among them the financier Jeffrey Epstein.
Come on in. Go inside.
More than a decade before his guilty plea on state prostitution charges. Later in the footage, Trump is seen talking to Epstein and another man as women are dancing in front of them. Trump alternates between dancing and pointing out women to Epstein and the other man and telling Epstein about the cameras. Though exactly what they say is difficult to understand as they discuss the women and their appearances, Trump gestures to one and appears to say to Epstein, "Look at her back there. She's hot." And then Trump says something else into Epstein's ear that makes him double over with laughter. But as the president says now, he never liked Epstein.
I was not a fan of his. That I can tell you. I was not a fan of his.
I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it, Jeffrey enjoys his social life.
The facts of this case date way back to the mid-2000s, when local Palm Beach authorities were investigating Epstein on allegations of similar sexual activity. Epstein was being investigated by both state and federal authorities in Florida. Epstein agreed to plead guilty to solicitation of prostitution in state court in Florida and served just over a year, not in prison, but on work release, where he was allowed to leave the facilities 6 out of 7 days of the week. But the federal government stayed its hand, deciding to instead enter into a non-prosecution agreement, with the idea being that the state prosecution was adequate and no federal prosecution was necessary. Even though Epstein is a registered sex offender, many observers felt his legal team had achieved a huge victory, especially because Epstein's case never even went to trial. For the most part, the Epstein case appeared to be a done deal. But last year, the Miami Herald started investigating the Epstein case and interviewing victims, publishing stories of their accounts.
We were underage. We were little girls. He wanted new, fresh, young faces every single day. He's probably the most prolific pedophile. I mean, to have abused this many young girls for this many years and have gotten away with it.
The Herald's reporting re-energized public interest in the case, including the interest of prosecutors in New York. Adding broader political intrigue to this case, Alex Acosta, who is now President Trump's Secretary of Labor, was then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, who approved this original plea agreement.
Mr. President, do you have any concerns about the Labor Secretary's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case?
I really don't know too much about it. I know he's done a great job as labor secretary, and that seems like a long time ago.
Epstein certainly ran in influential circles. Even then private citizen Donald Trump praised Epstein back in the day. So what's next? Epstein is facing very serious